Hey, hello everyone. Welcome to the Coinbase live stream. I'm your host, Pete Bickford, and hopefully this sounds okay for everyone. We changed up the intro just a bit here. I wanted to make it a video just so I could play it over another channel so that it didn't come in distorted like we were doing beforehand. So hopefully that's working, and we'll take it if it is. All right, guys. Well, anyway, I want to say hi to everyone for coming here. We're going to be talking. This will actually be probably a kind of a short show, but it should be kind of a fun one. But we're going to be doing top 5 controversial tips for saving time when managing your comic book collection. And these are all the things that they're either the things that we tell people on tech support, and they're like, yeah, right, or they're counterintuitive, or in one case, it sounds honestly like we're doing an outright scam on you. So it should be fun, and we'll take it from there. I'm going to save the comic-based news and other things probably for next week's show, because there's a bunch of stuff happening, which the news will keep, but I'd rather have all the fun news at once. So we'll do that one next time. So anyway, I just want to say hi to everyone before we go here. Mike Wagner's first in the house here, apparently just showing up and saying hi. Oro out in Minneapolis is here in the corn sweat heat wave. Excellent. Rob Weinberg from Ohio, Agent DeCamp is joining us from North Florida. Right on. Ed Billiot from Richmond. Our mod Greg Hecht is in the house. Thomas B from Nova. I had not heard that one before. Northern Virginia. And hail everyone in the chat here. Let's see here. The action figure checklist site. Interesting. I'd be curious about that myself. Jet City Comics. Hey, folks. Let's see here. Xanadu Comics is joining us as well. Oh, Pete's getting pro here. Yeah, no, I'm just tired of like sucking in exactly the same way every show. So even though I'm working on comic base because it's my actual job, I did think, let's spend a little bit of time here and actually try to iron out some of these wrinkles, which we have every single show. So we're trying. All right, let's see. Oh, and as Greg points out, let's do the PSAs early this time. Number one, please like and subscribe if this is the sort of thing you like, and if you think other folks might be interested, especially at the start of the show, it does help get the word out to other people who are in the subscription channel. If people interact, mash the like button, write a comment, anything like that, helps the algorithm, and we're all really interested in making the algorithm work. But please do that. And also remember, we have a dedicated thread on the Comic-Based message boards where you can request live stream topics, demos, and so forth, and also have links to all sorts of cool things that people in the Comic-Based community have done. All right, including Andre's world famous comic-based cover catalog. Okay, so let's get into it. So, like I say, the point of this show is, and as somebody pointed out, this sounds a lot like some kind of listicle that you'd see on CBR or one of those things right here. And the same guy pointed out that I also could save myself a great deal of time by simply having ChatGPT write the show for me. But in which case, I'd already be having my after show beer. But no, we want to do something special here. And as I was talking with my wife this morning, I said, yeah, on one hand, it's a kind of an intriguing topic for a show to say, like, hey, here's top 5 controversial topics. So that's good for curiosity, good for clicks. And it's absolutely the opposite of salesmanship, because if I want to convince you to do any of these things, the first thing you want to do when you're trying to sell someone anything is you want to try to get the customer to agree with you, or you want to agree with the customer. And so you want to say, like, oh, here's something you would absolutely agree with, and get them used to the habit of saying yes. So then when you have to lay on the end now, would you like to buy something from me? They're like, oh, look, I found you so agreeable up till now. Yeah, I will, of course, say yes. I'm going to tell you about all the things that people always say no to, and give a little bit of context as to why maybe, despite all that, it shouldn't be the case. So let's get into it, and let's see if any of my macros on my board work. All right, so let's see it here. Number 1. Holy cow, that actually worked. All right, guys. So number 1, And gosh, these first few tips fall into the category of good advice, which nobody takes, or at least it's really hard to take. It's like the Alanis Morissette song. Um, it's grade everything in your collection and grade it right. In other words, don't blow it off. Don't consider it's all near mint. Don't consider it's all mint, etc. No, be serious about all of it and be serious the first time. Take the time to get it right. Be as detailed as you need to be when grading, because as all of you guys will know, just by looking at values, the difference in value of a comic book is massively shaped by what condition it's in. This is not like I would say it's not even like rare books. I mean, if you have a rare Gutenberg Bible and it's still hanging on in one piece, it's practically considered mint. Um, whereas with a comic book, if there's the tiniest loss of cover gloss in the whole thing, suddenly you may have lost $5,000-$10,000 off of the price of it. It's the grading in comic books. They're a flimsy material that they're made out of. They're easily damaged. They kind of naturally want to self-destruct. And because you're dealing with a very non-durable item, the ones that aren't all destroyed are just work at such a premium in terms of what people are willing to pay for them. And so you've got to take really serious attention to what the grade is on the whole thing. Now, a lot of people who buy comic base especially are buying it because they're finally taking ownership of their collection, and they're saying, hey, I've got 5, 10, 50,000 comic books which I really need to do something with. They want to know what you've got, because you want to have a general idea of your inventory, but just importantly, you want to know what the whole thing's worth. And unless you take the actual grading of the comics seriously from the get-go, you will not have the answer to that second question. But I also realize, the reason that we tell people this and they kind of nod and they say, yeah, sure, I got it. But then they don't take the advice is because grading seems like a hell of a lot of work. And the last thing that they want to do when you're faced with an enormous amount of comic books to deal with is the idea that, wait, and I also need to worry about what shape they're all in? Are you kidding me? So let's just run through a little bit of what this looks like. I want to try to convince you that it's not as bad as you think, but also kind of like make really, plain the idea of what a difference it makes in terms of, whether you've got, what you think you've got. So let's flip over to the proper show over here. I believe that is this guy right over here. All right, and I'm going to put myself on the screen just because I can. All right, so with this one, I literally just my daughter is leaving for college finally, and and I hate to say this, but a couple people over the years have ordered things off me on Atomic Avenue, which I've had to cancel off their orders because I said, yeah, gosh, I really had that in my collection, and I don't know where it went, and we found out after I made my daughter clean out her entire room. Where it went was someplace in her room because she wanted to read that comic book. She's probably 8 years old and never put it back. Not that I'm bitter. Anyway, so let's go ahead and dial up some comic books that have suddenly reappeared in my collection because she's finally cleared her room. And so let's go to Richie Rich Dollars and Cents. All right. And this guy right in front of me right now, this guy right here, right, is just a copy of issue number, I believe it's 39. And there we are, that guy right there. And so if I had this thing and it was in near mint condition, it'd be worth $45. And I'm thinking, booyah! I paid $2 for this thing when I was on a trip once. Except as I look at it a little more closely, I will quickly realize, yeah, there's a little, damage on the cover here. The spine's not looking so great, and so forth. It's like, okay, it's probably not in near mint condition. So let's look at what this might look like. All right, one thing I want everyone to get used to, if you haven't seen it before, if you double click on any issue over here on the far left-hand side, you can pull up the details on it in Comic Base. Let me go ahead and zoom in. I actually pull up the magnifier so we can zoom in. Excuse me just a moment. Okay. So now we can pull up the magnifier. If you guys look just to the right of the condition over here, there's a little question mark. So if you happen to know the condition of this guy, you could just put it in yourself, whatever the thing is. But if you weren't sure what the condition was, click the question mark icon. It'll pull up the grading wizard. At which point you can sit there and say, all right, just looking at the comic book, what's wrong with it? And so you say things like, okay, surface wear. I guess moderate. The cover's not loose, but yeah, moderate surface wear. Biggest problem's it's got some soiling. So and which realistically it's not terrible, but you have to call it at least moderate. And when you look down at the bottom here, you instantly get told, oh, well, that means between those guys, it's in good condition. Now, there are other things that might have been wrong with it. So, for instance, on the spine, there are some very minor color breaks and about quarter-inch splits. But you notice that those don't enter into the equation down here because they're not as big a defect as these other ones. So, like if I set the surface wear to none and set the soiling to none, then at that point, the color break on the spine and the quarter-inch split would be the thing that knocks it into its condition of fine. But as soon as I sit there and say, well, no, I've got I don't have no soiling on the cover. I've got moderate, fading, discoloring, discoloration, soiling. Then suddenly that's the only thing that matters. It's not going to worry telling you about the splits because they're irrelevant to the grade. But as soon as I go there and I hit apply grade, all right, at that point, I'll notice that, look, even though this would be worth $45 in near mint, suddenly this thing is really worth $5.75 over here. And so when I print out a price label for this or do anything else, like, if I go to sell it, I'm talking about 20% of the value it would have been if it were in the near mint condition. It's worth the time. And look, it only took a moment for me to do that, and that's pretending that I know nothing about grading. I'm actually stepping through the whole wizard. Once you've done a bunch of grading, realistically, you can do it in a few seconds. Almost all the action is typically in the cover. I mean, there are some regressive cases where, like, yeah, it's a perfect cover, it's just that somebody clipped something on page 13. Okay, yes, in the history of the world, that can happen. And if you're talking about a very, very expensive book, yeah, at that point, review every page. But for just your regular comic books that you're just going to, someone's selling you their collection, you're just kind of thumbing through and just trying to figure out, like, what kind of shape these things are in. Realistically, just looking at the front cover, it's going to tell you 95% of the story in terms of grading, as far as what this thing is really worth. So absolutely, take the time, put the grade in. I know you don't want to do it. It seems like the biggest hassle in the world, but just be realistic. You're talking about a difference of 80% of the value that you're going to compute at the end of the day. But more importantly, you're never, ever, ever going to do it later. No, we've had tens of thousands of customers. I don't think I've ever met the customer who put everything in a near mint condition and then went back in again after entering in 5, 10, 50,000 comic books and said, okay, now I'm going to grade them seriously. That has never happened in the history of the company. So don't let it be you. I know it's a pain, but go ahead and grade things right away. And honestly, what I would do just to stay motivated as I go through the boxes, go into the file menu. And after you've done a box worth of books, or as many as it takes to get bored with it, go onto the file menu and say, show me the collection statistics, and just keep watching this number over here get bigger and bigger. And for me, at least, that absolutely absolutely helps keep me in the game. But no, if you feel like you're too tired to do it right, just stop for the day. You're not helping anything if you put your books in your collection not graded properly. You're just making, I'll put it this way. If you think about, life as a conversation between past you and future you is going to hate past you's guts if you do that to them. So be nice to future you, so make them think that past you was a right on guy who really took care of the future, and do it right. And Jet City Comics says, I'd like to see the grading wizard expanded. It's a great tool to use. I'd be curious. Give me some comments in the, if you would, in the chat, or follow up on support let us know what you're thinking as far as additions to the grading wizard. It's based right around the standards from the Overstreet Comics Grading Guide. But so in a way, it's just permutations of exactly the standards they've got there. But I'd be curious to see what sorts of things you'd like to see added to it. But we agree. I think it's one of the coolest little features in the program that nobody really knows much about. All right, moving on. So number 2, label everything. All right, guys, I know I am this again. This is like advice that we give people that, again, it's good advice which people don't take, because it feels like what we're asking you to do is to do more work. So you're telling me, hey, Bickford, you want us to do more work and that's going to save me time? go to hell. So what we're talking about is whether it's the labels at the top of the comic books, these little, ID labels up here, and so forth, or whether it's title divider labels, price labels, whatever you've got. Um, when you handle a comic book, always make sure you've got things labeled appropriately, because honestly, comic books, and we handle this literally every week on the tech support lines, are a nightmare in terms of knowing what the heck you're holding in your hands, even if you've been collecting comic books your entire life. So, in addition to just this handful of comic books that came out of my daughter's room, we have Richie Rich from Editions Heritage #5, which I guess is Richie Rich in French. We have Richie Rich Dollars and Cents from an older series, and then we have, and these ones are the worst of all of them, a Free Comic Book Day comic book, which is Hilda and the Troll Free Comic Book Day 2016. Now, I defy almost anyone to look at a comic book which on the front of it just says, Free Comic Book Day with the word Hilda on it, and come up with the idea that that's the thing's official title is Hilda and the Troll Free Comic Book Day 2016. And God help you if there's another one in 2017, because it'll look just the same, and for all I know, it'll say Hilda and the Troll. They will look like utterly different comic books. This is something that bedevils everyone every Free Comic Book Day of knowing how the heck to store these things at the when it's all said and done. But the same thing can happen if you're just looking at the latest issue of Blue Beetle. Is that Blue Beetle first series, second series, third series, fourth series, fifth series? Is it is it cover number 3A? Is it number 3B? Is it number 3J? Nobody knows. So don't make it hard on yourself later on as you're trying to put these things away, or you're trying to put them into your collection later on, or just refer to them later. If, let's say, you sell one and you want to pull the right comic book. I know it seems like a pain in the butt, but every single time that you handle a comic book, make sure it gets a label on it. It's in our company. It's as I've said many times before, I have to pay people, or at least in the good old days when I had people I could pay that handled the comic books at the business. Basically, I'm paying whatever wage we've got for a professional person to label, bag and board, and store comic books. So I want this to be as because I'm a stingy business owning guy, I want this to be as cheap as I can possibly make it, which means to say the total amount of time required to store, file, pull up later if we sell that comic book, I want this to be the least I can possibly pay them to do it. And so the thing that we found out, and we did lots and lots of time tests on this one. We just put this time test, we say, okay, yeah, we got the week's comic books in here. We got 120 comic books. We got to file. All right, go, start timing. And when we told people, yeah, we need you to stick an ID label on each one of these before filing it, every single one of our people said, really? Because it seems like I've just asked them to do another whole step. It's like, wait, this is already a tedious part of my job, and you may just made it worse. But what we found out is when, and again, these are guys who work with comic books all day long, doing it for years. They'd be filing comic books, and we'd watch them, and it'd be like, okay, I got Green Lantern number 73, we got Green Arrow number 14, and they'd be filing along great, and then they would stop like a rock in about every 8th comic book, where they'd have to go back to the computer, look up, this Blue Beetle I've got right here, is this number 3rd series or 4th series, and is it the B cover or the C cover? I mean, it would just stop like a rock, and every time they had to do that, it took infinitely longer than it would have been if they just stuck a label on it to start with. And then it gets even worse when it comes later on, when they have to pull it out, and because ideally we don't see a comic book one time, we see it 2 times. We see it once when we put it into the collection, and another time when we sell it, because the vast majority of comic books that we handle just for the business aren't things that we personally love. They're things we got to deal with because we're trying to track all the world's comic books. So I don't tell my daughter, but I don't personally have a great deal of affection for Hilda and her Troll. I mean, it could be a great comic book for all I know, but I don't personally, that's not where I live as a collector. So I would like to see the backside of this comic book someday, ideally in exchange for a few bucks. But for me, going out there and and being able to pull it out and find it in the right section, that's not misfiled under H for Hilda, that the Blue Beetle is not misfiled under the 4th series while I'm looking under the 3rd series. All these things, having a label on it makes it so much better. So yes, I know it seems like a pain in the butt. take the extra time, and we measured it out. When you're doing a batch of comic books, so if you're putting them into comic base and you're saying add by inventory, add by barcode, and you scan in, typically we do about 30 at a time. This is how many would fit in a box. Our shipping boxes that we send between California and here, we do about do them in about batches of 30. It adds about 5 seconds per comic to stick a label on it. Best 5 seconds we ever did. So do it. I know it feels like a pain, but it pays off. All right, so a couple comments on here. Yes, Agent of Camp says, yeah, the proper word is frugal, Pete. Or I'll go with penny pinching bastard. That works for me as well. All right, Scott Howell says, the labels are database specific. Correct. Yes, they are. So once upon a time, the labels, so prior to Comic Base 2020, 2020. So prior to when we did the really big rejigger of Comic Base, it used to be that we would label comic books as if they were just stock items in your store, because that's what we were thinking when we first did the product. So in other words, if you looked at the code that was on the label, it would say things like there'd be a code, like a 4-letter code for what the series was. It would have the issue number and then the condition, and anyone that was a near mint copy of the same code of the same issue was considered equivalent to each other. You could mix and match them. That stopped being realistic definitely when it stopped being particularly convenient when people wanted to track different costs, or different places that they'd bought different comic books, but also when comic books became very, very high end, and it really, really mattered. So I'm selling you a $500 copy of Action number 217, and they might both be in VG condition. One of them might be in VG condition due to a spine split. The other one might be in VG condition due to a cover bend. And if you bought one or the other, you might care. And so I can't just swap one for the other. So the databases are specific to that exact line in the exact database. So yes, so don't try to mix and match. If you look, especially if you look at the barcode that is printed on these ones, that'll take you to an exact record in a particular database. It'll take you straight there, and it's talking about that exact comic book. Now, if you say I have 3 copies of the same comic book on that line, it applies to any one of those 3, but that's all that applies to. All right, other things on here. The red line at the bottom of the screen blocks people's comments. What red line? I don't know. I don't know. What red line are you referring to, Oral? But you did. I'm actually on StreamYard, so I can't see. All right, so and then the other comment we had here from Greg says, I just want to point out, we don't use the short codes anymore. Okay, so let's see here. Aura says, like the grading focus on measurable and non-subjective things, gloss is subjective unless you have a glossimeter. They exist. Surface wear, how do you evaluate? Book length crease, obvious. Yeah, so we didn't want to innovate on the Overstreet grading guide. When we put together the grading wizard, we wanted to, there are certain things that were just, that is the industry standard. And so, for us to all be talking the same language, it doesn't help if you give different nuance to the standard. I love the parts of the grading guide where they're literally talking about a cover band that is 1/2 inch or less, whether it's color breaking or non-color breaking, because those are things that you absolutely, like, it's either that way or it isn't. You can get out a ruler and measure it. I don't love it when they use words like moderate or severe or things like that. Some of this, yeah, it's hard to quantify. Even things like paper color. There's a paper swatch book that I've seen at certain times where you talk about the brownness of the paper, where you can say, is it darker or lighter than this particular color? I like these kind of objective measures. I don't love the parts of the standard where they put them using subjective, adjectives like moderate, minor, extensive, and so forth. I think we have a general idea what you mean by that one, but I love the parts of their grading guide where they say something specific that, like, again, I couldn't stick a ruler up to and tell you whether it's one side or the other. That's it. Our purpose in doing our grading guide was to be faithful to the Overstreet grading guide. It wasn't to interpret for them. But to the extent that Overstreet starts, being more specific about what those terms mean, or giving lots and lots of examples, that's something I would love to see us embrace if they were to do that. What I don't think I want to do is I don't want to get into a situation where five different grading services all have their own take on what the grading standard is, because that does not help anyone. At that point, we're talking English versus Esperanto. It's you know, grading. The number one problem with grading is, number one, people don't do it. Number two, they don't do it accurately enough. They don't do it faithfully enough. What I usually tell people when you're grading things is grade like when you grade your own books like you're buying them, not like you're selling them. And it tends to force you to be a much more practical grader as far as heading off problems that a future buyer is going to have with you. So pretend that you are that future buyer right from the start. So that's the best advice I can give for people. I don't actually believe personally in these decimalized grading scales with infinite degrees of difference between, this one's an 8.6, the other one's 8.4. Yeah, no, I because I don't see any evidence that the grading services themselves are accurately taking the same books by the same measures and returning the same grade. And matter of fact, one of the sports that people have is submitting books to grading services when they don't like the grade, cracking the case back open, waiting a few months, and submitting it again with a different batch and seeing what happens. So that is a problem. if you can set the same book back 2 times and get a different number back the second time, having done nothing to the book, then yeah, there's a problem with the graders. You're trying to be more specific than the precision of the grading system itself. So I'm not a big fan of half grades and quarter grades and decimalized grades, things like that. I say if you could get the whole standard Overstreet 7 grades, right, you're ahead of most people who are playing in the comic market. But that being said, the main point I want to say is, I know it's a pain in the butt, but do your best in terms of grading the books right when you get them, because you're not going to do it later. All right, and okay, and Grace says, so if your cursor, not Pete's, over the YouTube video, then you get the red line. Okay, I don't know. So for what's worth, on the back end of what I'm doing right here, and I don't have the ability to show this to you right now, I'm actually not even on YouTube. I'm using a application called StreamYard, which bips everything out to all the different places. So I see your comments in the different window over there, aggregated from the different services. So anyway, to the extent that YouTube is messing with you, I hope it isn't. But all right, let's take it and move on. Number 3. Store your comics in sorted order. All right, so like I said, these first several tips here are things, it's like I said, it falls in the category of good advice that you just can't take, or at least nobody wants to take, because, oh my goodness gracious, does it ever look like work? Because it's work. But it turns out, if you've got any kind of size to your comic collection, storing it in sorted order versus storing it in a random order, it's probably the single biggest thing I could tell you to do to take the hassle out of your own comic book collection. Now, I know if someone just either past you did this, or if you're taking on somebody else's collection, but they just hand you 20 boxes of unsorted comic books. The idea of putting these into alphabetical and then numerical order sounds like the least fun you will do for the next million years. But no, actually, it turns out the least fun you will ever have is if you want to say, okay, yeah, I'm looking for my copy of Green Lantern number 217, and I know it's in box 23. So I'm going to open up box 23, and I'm probably going to move a whole bunch of boxes to get there. And then I'm going to go flipping through each comic, which, again, if I didn't put labels on them, I'm going to pull the thing out, squint, and see if I can find the issue number, squint and see if I can find the proper title. Is it the right series of Green Lantern, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm going to look through an average of 100 comic books. If you're talking about a long box, if they're bagged and boarded, I'm going to look through an average of about 100 comic books before I find the one comic book I'm looking for. If, on the other hand, I knew the box was in sorted order, and let's say that it had not just Green Arrow Lantern, but also Green Arrow, Green Lantern, Green Goblin, you want in the same box. It turns out, just because of math, I will have to touch no more than 7 comic books to be guaranteed to find any comic book if I knew that it was in sorted order. Because you basically, instead of searching, So comp sci guys, refer to any algorithm because we love sounding all scientifical and stuff. Any algorithm where you want to measure how effective it is, use n to say the number of things in the set, right? So if n is 200, right, is the number of comic books that I have to look for. On average, if it's an unsorted order, I have to look for it at n divided by 2 items. Now, I could get super lucky, it's the first one in the box. I could get super unlucky, and it's the very last one in the box. But on average, I will look at n divided by 2 items in order to find any particular item in that, in that set. On the other hand, I'm going to look at n log 2 items if I know it's a sorted order, because what I can do then is I say, okay, I look at, I stick my hand someplace in the middle and I say, okay, I'm at Green Goblin. Okay, too far. I'm sorry, not far enough. Green Lantern is further down because L comes after G. All right, so now I take my hand, put it, half the box further in the whole thing, and I say, okay, am I in Green Lantern second series or am I in Green Lantern first series? And again, if the thing's labeled, I'll know that answer in a fraction of a second, as opposed to having to pull it up and stare at it and squint at it and read tea leaves and do whatever else. But as you go through the whole thing, you're guaranteed to find the thing in no more than 7 touches in a box of 200. I might even be overstating the case. It might even be no more than 6. But so anyone who would like to, please feel free to check my math on this one. But it's dramatically less in order to pull anything. But that relies on you having it in sorted order. But also having it in sorted order simplifies every single other thing you do with the comic books. The only thing it doesn't sort out for you, I'm sorry, didn't mean to use it that metaphorically, but the only thing it doesn't make easier for you is if my strategy is that I want to collect the comic book and I want to never ever touch it again, and I don't care, future me be damned, future kids be damned, future anyone who deals with my comic books be damned, present me, is the only one who counts here. Yes, it is easier to dump it into the first available box I've got, write down which box it was if I feel like it, don't if I don't, and move on. So that, yes, that is faster for for present me to do that. Future me, future me who has to look this comic book up on the later on will hate my guts. So yes, guys, please put your comic books in order. I would suggest that putting them in title name order, and then secondarily in order by their issue number is probably the best overall solution. There's a reason your comic book store stores them that way, because when they want you to be able to find a comic book to buy, they don't want you, I mean, some people do. You'll see this with people's dollar stock. They'll say like, yeah, can't be bothered. So here's several huge bins of comic books. Knock yourselves out, kids. If you enjoy the hunt, who knows what you'll find, because I sure don't. And maybe you'll find something useful, or maybe you'll just wear yourself out going through the whole thing. But if you're looking for a particular comic book, hopeless. The idea you would find it, even if I told you, oh yeah, Green Lantern 217, I saw it the other day. I'm sure it's in the table there, somewhere in those 18 bins of comic books. You will never find that comic book. So anyway, yes, just so you guys says, present me is going to piss off future me. Yeah, no, it happens, guys, but just what we're trying to do, in general, as we walk through this world of life we've got going on, is we're trying to, not be quite as stupid as we were, 15 minutes, earlier. I mean, I don't mind making the same mistake in 15 different ways, but if I make it exactly the same mistake in exactly the same way again and again and again, after a while, I just feel like an idiot and I can't excuse myself anymore. And future me just hates me. So you want to be nicer to future you, and that's kind of like the dawning of wisdom. So anyway, sort your books. I will also say, just so that you're nice to present you enough that future you can get the benefit, don't try this if you don't have a way of putting your comics in order that involves you not having to move boxes physically in order to file something. What the hell do I mean by that? There are lots of different ways to store comic books. A long box is not the only game in town. For many years, I just had a bunch of really, really big bookshelves. And matter of fact, St. Paul Comics, where I first bought my comic books, there were no comic boxes almost in the entire store. I'm not sure if they had any at all, unless they were hauling stock to go someplace else. Everything they had was on traditional bookshelves, which is a perfectly good way to find anything. Because again, I can glide to any random point on the shelf and very quickly, say, okay, I'm at Captain Atom, I'm at Captain America, I'm looking for Captain Marvel. I would keep going in order. And as I go in there, I can just very quickly find the exact comic book I'm looking at just by touching a couple of things and getting to it quickly. And it isn't a really big deal for them to rejigger the loads of their bookshelves as things start getting, used or not used. Bookshelves may be a perfectly good solution for you, depending on how many comic books you've got. The problem a lot of us tend to have is when we have very large comic book collections, we don't have enough wall space to put them on bookshelves, and so we have to kind of stick them in boxes. That's fine as long as you don't then stack the boxes on top of each other, because when you have to move a bunch of boxes in order to get to the box that actually has the thing you want, then suddenly you've added just a ton of physical work into the process of doing this stuff. Which again, if you're trying to work on your on your strength building and your cardio and things like that, then I guess you can make it part of your active workout. Personally, though, I find that really annoying because comic books, paper is heavy. And I not tend to think that if I've punished myself so that in order to file, 30, a whole ton of comic books, I need to have then moved 50, 60 comic boxes out of the way. What am I going to do? I'm going to do what everyone else does. I'm going to find the nearest open comic books box. I'm going to dump them in there. And I'm going to say hell with it. And I'm going to shove it in the closet and hope I never have to go find anything. So you can get there, but I suggest not. There are better ways. One of the better ways, made by a customer who's also just a great guy, Rich Vinson, makes a thing called the collection drawer box, which is basically think of, and at some point I just gotta have when my garage is really nice and pretty looking, I gotta do a tour of just my own collection. But because we have 56,000 comic books stacked, 5 high, along several hundred boxes, where I can walk to any comic book in this collection and within 30 seconds be at the proper comic book, touching that comic book. Just because what collection drawer boxes do is they allow you to pull them out like a file drawer instead of having to move boxes to get to other boxes on top of things. They literally let you slide them out because all the boxes have shelves on top of them which maintain the integrity of the stack, so that you can pull out any particular one and you're good to go. Now, realistically, my garage is not particularly level. My comic collection drawer boxes are getting a little old, and I live in Tennessee, where all the construction's a little strange. Some of my boxes are showing a bit of wear, and some of them are easier to pull than others. I'm just going to leave it that way. I've seen some other solutions where if you've got the budget, some really, really nice ways of storing a lot of comic books is, if you can afford it, steel case file drawers are amazing for storing comic books. They're also amazingly expensive, but they give you lovely rollout, things for pulling things down. I have seen people on Etsy with very lovely woodworking projects where everything glides out on these lovely casters. Again, depending on your budget, that might be something you want to look at. We do collection drawer boxes because we tend to have a lot of comic books we're dealing with and be getting at them all the time. But whatever you do, again, I'd be a crazy person if I said, yeah, store your stuff in order, but you were somehow in a position where you had to lift a ton of comic boxes to get them into order. Don't put yourself in that situation. Find some way, however you do it, of getting it so you can get to any particular comic book without any particular comic box without moving another comic box to get to it, or you'll give up. You can't stand it. All right, so a lot of comments came in. Let's scrolling back. Let's see here. Okay. Scott Howell says, what suggestions start with 35 years of books, mostly alphanumeric by 3 months for later periods? Earlier, wow, what do you think whole runs? So what, I think I've told the story before. At one point, we had a chance there was an advertising person over at Comics Buyer's Guide who was on the comp list from Marvel, DC, Dark Horse, Image, all those guys, and did not personally collect comic books at all. But every week she'd come into the office and there'd be all these boxes waiting for her with every single thing these people had published. And years and years went by, and she would just take these home every week and stick them in her basement in a big pile. All these unopened boxes. And anyway, at one point she decided, well, yeah, okay, I'm going to leave Comic Buyer's Guide, and I got to clean out my basement because the realtor is wondering what are all those piles of boxes doing down there. And I found out about this, and we made an offer through Brent Frankenhoff over at Comics Buyer's Guide to say, hey, would you like us to just pay your shipping and give you several $1,000 and you simply just ship them all to us? So what happened is all of a sudden I wound up with, I want to say something like 7,000 comic books that were all just, it all represented the complete publishing output for many years of Marvel, DC, Dark Horse, Image. And they were all in essentially random order because they'd just been sitting there. They arrived on pallets at our door, and we had to somehow incorporate these into the collection. And what we wound up doing is we slid open all the boxes, we cleared out a massive, massive space. We just moved all the furniture back in my living room, and I just walked around in a circle for about a day and a half, just going, all right, Amazing Spider-Man, it goes in the A pile. Aquaman goes in the A pile. B, it goes in the Batman pile. G, that goes Green Lantern, that goes in the Green Lantern pile, and just plopped the comic books into a pile by first letter. And then when that's all done, and by the way, if you do this, my major advice for you is whatever space you're leaving for your piles in your living room or whatever place you're doing this kind of little exercise, the pile for S should be 3 times larger than all the other piles. We're all this way. It will be 3 times larger than all the other piles. So leave enough space for it, because otherwise all the piles start, falling onto each other, and it gets, not good. Obviously, the Q and Z piles don't need to be particularly large at all, but S is going to be epic. But anyway, so we went around like this for like a day, day and a half, just plopping them into first letter. And then we went to each pile and we said, okay, great. Let's take all the Amazing Spider-Man out of this pile. Let's take all the Aquaman out of this pile. And then we sorted them by title. And then once we had them in by title, by then we'd also bagged and boarded them. We went and we put them in numerical order, and then boom, they were good to go. And once they were in numerical order and in alphabetical order, incorporating them into the collection was actually a piece of cake. And for that matter, entering them into the collection was a piece of cake. But yeah, take a lot of space, physical space, in the biggest room you've got to do this in, obviously climate controlled, and put on some music and walk around, make piles. And it turns out the chore is actually done way faster than you would have thought. But once you've got there, then suddenly managing all the rest of your collection is so much faster. Okay. Let's see. Let's talk about future you, so forth. I'm going to skip past some of this one. Wow, a lot of talk. Bookshelves, older Marvels. Okay, storage solutions. All right, we're gonna move on from there. Okay, let's go on to tip number 4, and these ones will actually probably get a little less controversial. So the first 3, like I say, it's good advice. Hopefully everyone recognizes that, yeah, it'd be great if I could do that, but there's reasons I'm not doing it right now. But they all kind of rely on these are things that if you do them, future you will love you for having done them. Let's get into some other things that strike you as like, huh? What the hell are you talking about, Bickford? And so let's start with install all the comic-based pictures. All right, so this one, obviously, it's not just comic books, if you're referring to specifically comic base itself. And it is not the most intuitive advice we're going to give you. We will constantly be taking tech support calls from people saying, yeah, okay, I've been using the program for 7 years, whatever else, and but I need help with something or other. So we'll remote onto onto their machine to do a tech support session, and we're like, hey, how come you got no pictures? They're like, I didn't want to slow down the computer, with all that pictures and stuff. And so they're walking around, and you're trying to figure out which of the 15 series of Teen Titans is the one we're talking about, and you're having to squint at the the issues and the cover dates and try to interpret it through that and so forth. And then the funny thing is, this was an effect that was especially pronounced if you have an old-fashioned hard drive as opposed to an SSD. But it turns out all these people thought that they were saving a lot of space on their computer. They were keeping it from running slowly by not installing the pictures. Turns out they're actually making their computer run a fair amount slower because every single time it would go to a title, Comic Base is always going to try to find the picture that goes with that title or that particular issue. It's going to spend a little time searching for that. It's grants a very small amount of time, but if it's all the time, you're actually making the whole program run quite a bit slower if you don't install the pictures. So Yeah, when you get Comic Base Express Edition or Free Edition, the pictures that come with it are installed right away. Just you don't need to do anything special. Those are just one and done installers. If you have Comic Base Pro, especially if you have Comic Base Archive Edition, take a little bit of extra time. Click that other download link and install the. And I would say install the quick start pictures. If you have the Pro, there's only one set of pictures, but take the time, download that, hit the install pictures and movies. It will actually make the program run, noticeably faster. The other thing it'll do is it'll make you noticeably faster. I was just on a call just last night, after hours, a guy, called in, and he was looking for particular giveaways under New Teen Titans and so forth, which is, a hard comic book to find because there isn't really a Keebler series for the New Teen Titans, but there is a series of Teen Titans giveaways and promos, some of which were sponsored by Keebler, some of which have particular writing on the issue between the 3 and the 3A cover, which says, well, is this part of all proceeds given to fight drugs, or is the writing say all proceeds for the President's Council on Drug Abuse? And so that would differentiate the different thing. Or you could read all the stuff in the notes by squinting at every little tiny detail. But man, what's fast? Looking at the darn picture and say, oh yeah, it's that one. Because in 2 seconds flat, you'd have known what comic you were looking at just by saying, oh yeah, it's that one. So this, and I don't want to be too obnoxious about it, but yeah, especially with as many comic series as we've got, as many variants as we've got and things like that, it having photo art for as much as you can is really useful. At the very minimum, if you're using one of the other editions like the Pro, being able to instantly tell just by the trade dress that goes along with it which series you're looking at, because over the years, if you're talking about Blue Beetle first series, second series, third series, so forth, if you just look at the issue number one, you know pretty quickly, oh yeah, it's not that series, it's a different one. It's not the one that says mini series, it's not the one with it was a 60-cent cover price on the front. It's the one that looks much more modern, much more whatever else. You'll very quickly be able to move around and see what you're doing. And that's actually one of the reasons why when you go to Comic Base and you start typing in the title, it shows you a little tiny preview image right next to where the name is, just so you can get visually a cue to say, oh yeah, no, that's not the right title. It's this one over here. So yeah, it does feel like it's taking extra time. It does take a tiny amount of time, but do take the extra time and install the pictures because it'll make everything faster. Now, the one thing I would say, there's a little asterisk after the install the pictures part. Two things I would say. One, and I just had to update some old trade collateral. It's amazing when things change. It's like, yeah, they can change out from under you, and they change, you didn't even notice it. But we had an old thing told that this is the advice we would give people even 5 years ago. We said, look, if you're going to buy the archive edition with it, and at that point it had like 725,000 pictures or something like that. We said, yeah, for sure, don't try to download it. You'll go crazy. Because at the time we were getting a lot of tech support things saying, oh man, it's 1,000,000 megabytes and you got to have it in 15 different parts because there was 2 meg file limits built in all the browsers, or 2 GB file limits and so forth. And so we get a lot of tech support from people who's, the old thing used to be, over your very slow internet connection, make a separate folder for each of the 4 DVDs and put each of the 6 parts into each one and then decompress them all. And it's much easier. Just stick the disc in the drive and hit install. And so we were always telling people, hey, just buy it on disc if you're going to get the archive. Funny thing, man, 5 years later, wouldn't give that advice at all because all the things underneath changed. The internet that we can serve up with, I believe, we're something like 40 times faster, 30 times faster than we were even a couple years ago. Thank you, gigabit Ethernet. There's no longer the need to separate big installer files into quite so many parts because all the browsers have been updated to allow that kind of downloading and so forth. And the other thing that happened is a couple of versions ago, we introduced this new concept called Quick Start Pictures, where what we figured we could do is if we took all the pictures that were on these massive archives, at this point, we are pushing 1 million cover pictures that are in the main program. And instead of trying to push 1 million high-res JPEGs to everyone, which would take a gajillion gigabytes to store on your hard disk, we thought, well, what if we make just this, just like when you go to a web page and you're just looking at the small product images, on Amazon, it doesn't download the high-res images of every product on Amazon until you click on one and say, hey, I want to see more detail on this one. What if we did the same thing where we show you have a higher version of the number one issue of all the titles in Comic Base. But for all the other ones, we'll have a very small one. It's big enough to see on the grid. It looks just perfectly fine, but it's really, really small. It only takes a couple of K to do all this stuff. And we compress these into a single archive. So you download one thing. You download, and these days you can download that thing in, well under a minute or two, depending on the speed of your internet connection. Install one thing, and suddenly you've got, a million pictures of everything. And then, and here's the other part of the trick, anytime you click on anything or anytime you interact with anything, the second you've done that, before it even shows it to you, it's already pulled down the high-res version of that particular thing. And so then you kind of have the best of both worlds, without taking a ton of your disk space, without taking a ton of download time, without being super complicated to download. You've got all the reference for everything you've got, so you could tell the different versions apart and so forth. And anytime it's a series that's actually of interest to you, because I mean, when you start talking about things like a million pictures, the vast majority of them you're never going to spend the time looking at. It's just, you can't. I mean, not unless that's your full-time occupation 24/7. I think someone figured out that if you spent like even 5 seconds looking at every picture in Comic Base when it was, only a few 100,000, it was going to take a number of weeks 24/7 to look at them all. At this point, there's such a stupidly huge amount of information that comes with Comic Base. No, you want to be able to just glance and recognize stuff, and then the second you actually interact with it, then if you can pull down in well under a second the full high-res version, then you've kind of got something here. So I would say, yeah, do download, install the pictures, but install the quick start pictures. I mean, even us at Comic Base Central, we don't install the full, the full suite of disk packages anymore, because the other thing works so very well. And I think that's definitely the future, especially as we get into a world where DVD drives, Blu-ray drives are just kind of going away from modern computers. Trying to download a gajillion gigabytes of imagery for everything, the vast majority of which you'll never actually interact with in any way, that's just a waste of your disk space. So, do yourself a favor. Take, there's an easy way now with the quick start pictures. Take the easy way. It's better. And matter of fact, in the next version of Comic Base, you're going to see that we're going to make it even easier. So you'll see. All right. All right, and so there we go. All right, and so the very last one, and this is the one that's going to make you think that Bigford's just pulling a scam. So let's hit it. Temporarily turn off your antivirus software. All right, so this used to be so when you got Comic Base, there's a little card that came in the package if you had like the physical discs on it, and it has the same advice that everything that was installed off disk has, which is to say, when you're installing the software, make sure you turn off your antivirus thing, because otherwise your antivirus software can interfere with the installer, making the whole thing not work right. And we have never found a way to tell people that without sounding like we are trying to pull a scam on them. It is the scammiest sounding thing that you will ever hear in your life, and yet it's also true. Because I mean think about what we're telling me. You're telling me, hi, well, we'd like you to install something that you've just met it for the first time, but you're not really sure what you're installing necessarily, anything. But no matter what you do, make sure you turn off the thing that checks all these things on your computer before installing it. Yeah, that sounds scammy as hell. And yet it's true. Because it turns out that antivirus software is a war between the bad guys and the good guys. We spend a fair amount of money every year buying things like code signing certificates and, having our reputation, things like that. See that that anything that is delivered by us that comes signed by human computing, that gets, if you're actually even able to click on the installer, it's gone through a few levels of verification to prove that it's coming to you from us and not some guy claiming to be us. It's in an unaltered form from the way that we transmit it and so forth. So if you were like a bad guy and you want to say, I've got the new virus-based product I'm going to have you install, I'll just take a copy of Comic Base, I'll insert a virus in it, and then I'll put it out as coming from human computing. Turns out you can't do it because there's code signing certificates that would say, yeah, no, there's only one person on the planet can be human computing, that's us. And once the package is altered in any way, it no longer can look like it's from us. And modern Windows installers and things like that will all check for that virus signature. You guys have probably tried to install some kind of like freeware or independent software from people and say like, hey, this was downloaded from the internet, we don't know who this guy is. What that's doing is saying that the code signing certificate doesn't, it isn't signed from a code signing certificate from anyone who's we've ever heard of. And so you're on your own if you install this. You'll notice you will never get that package. You'll never get that when you're installing it from us because, yeah, among other things, we have to fork out a ton of money in order to pay for code signing certificates and authentication and verification and so forth. But anyway, what would happen with this battle between the bad guys and the good guys is antivirus software would try to detect what a pattern is that looks hinky. Just whatever they're using to determine what hinkiness is, they would say, I don't know, this looks weird to us. So we're going to scan every single file you install using whatever heuristics we've got. And most of the heuristics are actually based on AI. It isn't so much that they've identified, virus number 23.A, and yes, we see by its code vector that it does this, this, and this, and so we're going to look for those exact things and move it on. No, they use machine learning to say, okay, certain types of behaviors are the sorts of things that viruses might be doing, or they might be markers. So we're just going to consider this one as suspicious. And at one point, just to show you how weird some of it can get, we have a title in Comic Base called Virus. Dark Horse title. It was like Machines Come to Life, and I want to say, oh God, who is the chick from Halloween? Anyway, but it was a halfway decent, late 80s, 90s horror movie set in a ship. But at one point we had antivirus software was literally catching on the fact that there was a graphic file called virus.jpg, which was the picture of virus number 1, and it was saying, no, clearly you're trying to install malware. And so, yeah, Jamie Lee Curtis, thank you very much for that. But yeah, so yeah, and ask us how much we love, malware bytes, because of the rigorous standards of stuff that they would do for their virus database. Anyway, so what people are saying is when you're installing stuff that you mean to be installing, like you're not just like browsing and clicking random things on the web and and it said, oh yeah, here, click to scan your computer or all that kind of stuff. That stuff legitimately, if you're executing code at that point, you're probably getting hit with a virus. So, but let's say you've gone and you've actually bought some software that you mean to install. You know what you bought and you mean to install it. The reason everyone's advice says temporarily turn off your antivirus is because otherwise these wonderful people trying to keep your stuff from antivirus thing are frequently going to false flag software, and just again, something as banal as, we have the picture of virus number 1 is in a folder called virus, and flag it as potentially malware, scare the bejesus out of you. But more importantly, as often as not, block certain system components which we need to work. Another one that was flagged for ages is there was a web component that Microsoft ships with that would allow you to send a post to a server, which basically would let you say, hi, Mr. Web Server, I have some data for you. Go, right? And some virusy guys in the universe had said, oh, hey, I'm going to use that along with some known compromised servers, and we'll use it to post spam to the internet. And then that turned into a really, really overly broad rule, which got applied through several packages of antivirus software on the web. It says, oh, if you ever are downloading software which uses, it was called HTML XMP or something like that, we're going to, if we ever see you try to install that file, which was not part of Windows, it wasn't built in, but it was part of a common dev kit, then clearly you're up to no good. And we're going to block the installation. So if they were installing with their antivirus turned on when they ran the whole thing, they would install Comic Base. It would block the installation of the critical component that we would use to tell you, hi, this is user Joe Bob, whoever else, with serial number blah blah blah, and he would like to get his updates now, please. But it would say, hey, I've just turned off the ability to have that system component work, so yeah, go to hell. And then people would call us and say, hey, I install your software, having left my antivirus software turned on, and none of my posting components to servers work at all. Can you help me? And we would all say, did you turn off your antivirus when you installed? And they would all sometimes say yes, sometimes say no. But if we then set up a tech support session and we turned it all off, then of course it would work every single time. But yeah, it's weird, guys. I'm like, my sympathies to you entirely. But when you're installing software that you mean to install, turn off the antivirus just for a moment. And then finally, a comment, and this is just the weirdest thing ever. That's in general when you're installing anything. When you're installing Comic Base, in particular, the picture. So remember I said that there's a quick start pictures where you can install one file and it'll decompress and there'll be almost a million JPEG files that it'll put on your hard disk. Well, guess what happens to your time required to install if you take even a perfectly good, really well written, well constructed antivirus software and you say, hi, I need you to examine 1 million files. The answer is, well, it takes dozens of times longer to install. Whereas if you could just turn that off while you're doing the install, it turns out that you can install and decompress about 1 million JPEG pictures in a couple of minutes. But if you got to have even something, it's really one of the best antivirus software packages out there, just Windows Defender, the one built right into Windows. Suddenly it's about 12 times slower if that's still running as active protection while you're doing the install. So I'm putting the advice out there. I know it sounds scammy. I get it. Totally do. But I would say if you know what you're doing, if you are the kind of guy who doesn't just click on every attachment that a friend sends you saying, oh, hey, here Bill Gates wants to give you $1 million or whatever the thing is, do at least consider going into, let's go over to, say, Windows Defender here. Sorry, it's running the screensaver here. If you go to so in Windows Defender, Windows Security over here. All right, so if you look at your virus and threat protection, and you look at the virus threat protection settings, consider just while you're installing Comic Base, there's a setting here called real-time protection. For only as long as it takes you to install Comic Base, consider turning this off. And if you say yes, it'll say, well, I'm going to turn myself on in 5 minutes anyway. So that's fine. If you do that, you will find out that your installs of those jillions of pictures happen in a couple of minutes as opposed to like an hour or whatever the thing takes. Consider it. You don't need to believe me on this one. The only thing that you'll really hurt if you don't do it is at some point, it just takes longer. But do consider, at least when you're installing, turning that off temporarily. And like I say, if you doubt whether we're on the level on this whole thing, by all means, feel free to run a full virus check of your computer the moment you've installed Comic Base, or just once a week. You ought to be doing anyway. Not a bad idea. But yeah, when you're installing a jillion files, virus stuff can really, really slow down the works. All right, so that's kind of the show. And I guess it was not quite as short as I thought it might be. But thank you everyone for hanging in there. I see we have some interesting comments on the whole thing. To Comic Base virus was originally intended as a pitch for a movie IIRC. IIRC? I don't know the abbreviation, man. I'm sorry. Don't know. I'm sorry, man. You've outgeeked me. This is the part where you can go, okay, boomer. But anyway, okay, guys. Well, that's about it for now. Thank you for joining us on this one. And please, if you have comments, suggestions, please interact in the chat. We love hearing about it. And we will see you on the next one. Take care. Bye-bye.